The alarm clock buzzed at 4:30 in the morning, just like it had every day for the past 3 years. Maria Elena rolled over in her small bed, her body aching from yesterday's work. The mattress was old and lumpy, but it was all she could afford. She looked across the tiny room at her two children sleeping peacefully on the other bed. 8-year-old Carlos was curled up like a little ball. While 6-year-old Isabella had kicked off her blanket again, Maria smiled despite her tiredness. These two little ones were her whole world, her reason for getting up every morning and fighting through another day. She quietly got dressed in the dark, careful not to wake them. Her work uniform was simple, black pants and a white shirt that she washed by hand every night. The fabric was getting thin from all the washing, but it was clean, and that was what mattered. Before leaving, she kissed both children gently on their foreheads. Carlos stirred a little but didn't wake up. She left a note on the kitchen table reminding them to eat the oatmeal she had prepared the night before and to walk to school together. Mrs. Rodriguez from next door would check on them later, just like she did every morning. The first job started at 5 in the morning at the downtown office building. Maria was part of the cleaning crew that worked while everyone else was still sleeping. She mopped floors, emptied trash cans, and cleaned bathrooms in the tall glass building where important business people worked. Sometimes she would find expensive pens left on desks or see photos of families going on vacations to places she had only seen in magazines. As she cleaned, Maria often found herself humming quietly. Music had always been her escape, even during the hardest times. Her fingers would move against the mop handle or the desk surfaces, pressing invisible piano keys as melodies played in her head. She didn't even realize she was doing it most of the time. It was just natural, like breathing. The other cleaning ladies were kind to her. Rosa had been working there for 15 years and always shared her coffee with Maria. "You have such a beautiful voice," Rosa would say. "My grandmother used to hum like that when I was little." Maria would just smile and keep working. She never told them about her past, about the music that once filled her life completely. By 9 in the morning, the office cleaning was done. Maria would rush to catch 2 buses to get to her second job at the diner on 5th Street. The buses were always crowded, and she often had to stand for the entire ride. During these bus rides, she would look out the window and see the music school where she used to study. The building looked the same as it did 20 years ago, but everything else in her life had changed completely. At the diner, Maria worked as a dishwasher and helped prepare simple foods. The kitchen was hot and steamy, and her hands were always wet from washing dishes. The work was hard, but her boss, Mr. Chun, was fair and sometimes let her take home leftover food for the children. This helped a lot since money was always tight. During her lunch break, Maria would sit in the small alley behind the diner and call her children. Carlos would tell her about his math homework, and Isabella would describe the pictures she drew. In art class, these phone calls were the best part of her day. Hearing their voices reminded her why she worked so hard. "Mama, when are you coming home?" Isabella would always ask. "Soon, my little angel. Mama has one more job, and then I'll be home to make dinner." The third job was in the evenings at the fancy hotel restaurant. Maria served tables and helped in the kitchen until late at night. The restaurant served rich people who wore expensive clothes and talked about things she didn't understand. They rarely looked at her when she brought their food, treating her like she was invisible. But Maria watched everything. She saw how the musicians played during dinner service, how the piano player's fingers moved across the keys. Sometimes, when she was cleaning tables after closing, she would stand near the piano and remember how it felt to play. Her hands would itch to touch the keys, but she never dared. One night, the regular piano player had called in sick, and the restaurant manager was stressed. "We have important guests coming tonight," he said to the other workers. "This dinner has to be perfect." Maria wanted to say something, to offer to play, but she was just the help. Who would believe that a woman who cleaned tables could play piano? The walk home was always long and lonely. The buses stopped running after 10, so Maria had to walk 40 minutes through neighborhoods that weren't always safe. She carried pepper spray that Carlos had saved money to buy for her birthday. "To keep you safe, Mama," he had said with such serious eyes when she finally got home. Usually around 11 at night, both children would be asleep. Maria would sit at their small kitchen table and count the day's earnings. Every dollar was important. Rent was due in 2 weeks, Isabella needed new shoes, and Carlos was growing out of his clothes again. Sometimes, late at night when everything was quiet, Maria would sit at the old keyboard she had bought from a thrift store for $20. Half the keys didn't work and it didn't sound like a real piano, but it was all she had. She would play very quietly, so quietly that even she could barely hear it. The music would flow from her fingers like water, all the songs she remembered from her student days, all the emotions she kept buried during the day. Her neighbors didn't know that 20 years ago, Maria had been one of the most promising students at the music conservatory. She had won competitions and played for audiences who gave her standing ovations. Her professor had said she had the talent to play with famous orchestras around the world, but life had other plans. She met Roberto, fell in love, got married, and had children. Roberto worked construction and made good money, so Maria stopped her music studies to focus on family. They were happy. Roberto would come home from work and listen to her play their old upright piano. "Play that song again," he would say, "the one that sounds like sunshine." Then came the accident. Roberto was working on a high building when the scaffolding broke. The doctors did everything they could, but it wasn't enough. Suddenly, Maria was alone with 2 small children, no money and no way to pay for music school anymore. The piano had to be sold to pay for Roberto's funeral. That was 3 years ago. 3 years of working 3 jobs, 3 years of pretending she didn't miss music with every breath, 3 years of being strong for Carlos and Isabella while her heart broke a little more each day, but every night, as she tucked her children into bed, she would hum the same lullaby. And her children would fall asleep to the most beautiful music in the world, never knowing that their mother had once been destined for greatness. Tonight was different from Maria's usual evening shift at the hotel restaurant. Instead of serving regular customers, she was working at the grand ballroom for the annual charity gala. The event was the biggest social gathering of the year, where all the wealthy people in the city came together to donate money and show off their expensive clothes and jewelry. Maria arrived 2 hours early to help set up. The ballroom looked like something from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting sparkling light across white tablecloths and golden chairs. Fresh flowers decorated every table, and the smell was so sweet it made her think of the small garden her grandmother used to keep. The other catering staff were busy arranging plates and polishing glasses. Maria had worked with most of them before at different events. There was old Tony, who always told funny jokes to make the work go faster, and young Patricia, who was saving money for nursing school. They were good people, working hard to support their families just like her. "Maria, you'll be serving drinks tonight," said Supervisor Janet, handing her a black vest to wear over her white shirt. "Remember, smile, but don't talk unless they ask you something. These people don't like chatty servers." Maria nodded and put on the vest. She had learned long ago how to become invisible around rich people. They looked right through her as if she was part of the furniture. Sometimes it hurt, but mostly she was grateful for the work. Tonight's event would pay her an extra $50, which meant Isabella could get those new shoes she needed. As the guests started arriving, Maria watched them from the kitchen doorway. The women wore gowns that probably cost more than Maria made in 6 months. Their jewelry sparkled under the lights, and they moved with the confidence that comes from never worrying about money. The men wore perfect black suits and talked loudly about their businesses and golf games. Maria picked up a tray of champagne glasses and walked into the crowd. The guests took drinks without even looking at her face. She was just another server, another invisible person making their evening pleasant. But Maria didn't mind. She found their conversations interesting, even when they were talking about problems that seemed silly to her. "The contractor is 3 days late with our pool renovation," one woman complained to her friend. "I specifically told him we need it finished before our summer party." Maria thought about her own apartment where the kitchen faucet had been dripping for 2 months because she couldn't afford to fix it. But she just smiled and offered more champagne. The evening was going smoothly until the entertainment portion began. A beautiful black piano had been placed on the small stage, donated by a wealthy family for the charity auction later. The hired pianist, a thin man with nervous hands, sat down to play background music while people ate their fancy dinner. Maria was clearing plates from a nearby table when she heard the first wrong note. The pianist stopped, tried again, and hit another dead key. His face turned red as he realized something was seriously wrong with the piano. He lifted the lid and looked inside, then tried a few more keys. Several keys in the middle of the piano made no sound at all, and others produced weak, muffled tones that barely carried across the room. The event coordinator, a stressed woman named Linda, rushed over to the piano. "What's wrong?" she whispered. "Urgently, I can't play on this," the pianist said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "At least 6 keys are completely dead, and several others are barely working. It must have been damaged during transport." Linda's face went pale. The guests were expecting music with their meal, and the piano was supposed to be auctioned later for thousands of dollars. How could she explain that the expensive donated piano was broken? Mrs. Whitmore, a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled gray hair and a diamond necklace, had been watching the whole scene. She was known for throwing the most exclusive parties in the city and for her sharp tongue. Nothing happened at these events without her noticing. "What seems to be the problem, Linda?" Mrs. Whitmore asked, walking over with her champagne glass in hand. "The piano has some technical issues," Linda replied quietly, hoping not to draw too much attention, but Mrs. Whitmore's voice was loud, and other guests started gathering around to see what was happening. "Technical issues? You mean it's broken?" She laughed, but not in a kind way. "Well, that's just perfect. Here we are at a charity gala with a broken piano." The pianist packed up his music sheets, clearly embarrassed. "I'm sorry, but I can't perform under these conditions. It would sound terrible." More guests joined the group, curious about the commotion. Maria continued clearing tables nearby, but she could hear every word. Her heart began beating faster as she looked at the piano. Even from a distance, she could see which keys were the damaged ones. "This is ridiculous," said Mr. Thompson, a man who owned several car dealerships. "We paid good money for this event, and now there's no music?" Linda was almost in tears. The whole evening was falling apart, and she didn't know how to fix it. The hotel manager would be furious, and the charity would lose money. That's when Mrs. Whitmore's eyes landed on Maria, who was standing nearby with a tray of dirty plates. A cruel smile spread across her face as an idea formed in her mind. "Wait a minute," Mrs. Whitmore said loudly, causing everyone to turn and look. "I have a solution to our little problem." She pointed directly at Maria, who suddenly felt like a deer caught in headlights. All the wealthy guests turned to stare at her, and the room started to get quiet. "Why don't we have one of the staff play for us?" Mrs. Whitmore continued, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I'm sure our hard-working server here is just as talented as our broken piano." The crowd began to murmur and giggle. Some guests looked confused, others seemed amused by the suggestion. Maria felt her face burning with embarrassment as dozens of eyes stared at her. "Come on," Mrs. Whitmore said, gesturing for Maria to come closer. "Don't be shy. I bet you've always dreamed of playing for an audience like this." More laughter rippled through the crowd. To them, it was all a joke. The idea of a server, a poor woman in a cheap uniform, sitting down to play piano at their fancy event was hilarious. It was entertainment they hadn't expected. Linda tried to intervene. "Mrs. Whitmore, I don't think that's necessary. We can just have dinner without music." But Mrs. Whitmore was enjoying herself too much to stop. "Nonsense, this will be fun. Come here, dear," she called to Maria. "Show us what you can do with our broken piano." Two damaged things together. The room erupted in laughter at this comment. People started clapping and calling for Maria to come to the piano. What had started as Mrs. Whitmore's cruel joke was turning into a spectacle that the whole room wanted to see. Maria stood frozen, holding her tray of dirty dishes, Her supervisor, Janet, appeared beside her, whispering, "You don't have to do this. Just ignore them and go back to the kitchen." But something was stirring inside Maria. 20 years of suppressed dreams. 3 years of working like a machine, years of being treated as invisible and worthless. She looked at the broken piano, then at the faces of the crowd waiting for her. Humiliation. The woman who had once played for standing ovations was still there, buried deep inside the tired server. And for the first time in years, she was angry enough to let her out. Maria stood there holding the tray of dirty dishes, feeling like the whole world was watching her. The laughter from the crowd felt like needles piercing her skin. Her hands were shaking so badly that the plates on her tray started to rattle against each other. She had faced many difficult moments in her life, but nothing had prepared her for this kind of public humiliation. Mrs. Whitmore was still smiling that cruel smile, waiting for Maria to either run away in embarrassment or make a fool of herself at the piano. Either outcome would provide entertainment for the wealthy guests who were now gathering closer to see the show. "What's the matter, dear?" Mrs. Whitmore called out sweetly. "Cat got your tongue? Or are you afraid our broken piano is too good for you?" More laughter filled the ballroom. Maria could see some guests pulling out their phones, probably ready to record whatever happened next. The thought of her humiliation being shared on social media made her stomach turn. Janet, her supervisor, put a gentle hand on Maria's arm. "Come on," she whispered. "Let's go back to the kitchen. You don't have to deal with this." But Maria couldn't move. Something was happening inside her that she hadn't felt in years. It started as a small flame in her chest, growing bigger with each cruel comment from the crowd. It was anger, but not the kind that makes you want to shout or cry. It was the kind of anger that comes from years of being treated as less than human. Years of hiding who you really are, years of letting people believe you're nothing special. She thought about her children sleeping peacefully at home, unaware that their mother was being mocked by people who wouldn't last a day in her life. She thought about all the nights she had worked until her feet were swollen and her back ached, just to put food on the table. She thought about her husband Roberto, who had always believed in her talent even when she doubted herself. "You can do anything, Maria," Roberto used to say. "When you play music, you become magic." The memory of his voice gave her strength. She slowly set the tray down on a nearby table and looked up at the crowd. The laughter was starting to die down as people realized she wasn't running away. "I don't think this is a good idea," Linda said nervously, trying to regain control of the situation. "Maybe we should just continue with dinner." But Mrs. Whitmore wasn't finished with her entertainment. "Oh no, we can't stop now. Our talented server was just about to show us her skills." She turned to Maria with mock encouragement. "Go ahead, dear, we're all waiting." Maria took a deep breath and started walking toward the piano. With each step, the crowd grew quieter. Some people looked excited to see what would happen, others seemed uncomfortable with how far the joke had gone. But Maria wasn't thinking about them anymore. She was thinking about the music that had been locked away in her heart for 3 years. As she got closer to the piano, she could see exactly what was wrong with it. The middle C key was completely dead, along with the D and E right next to it. The F and G keys were making weak, muffled sounds that barely registered. It was worse than she had thought from a distance. She stood beside the piano bench for a moment, running her fingers along the smooth black surface. It was a beautiful instrument, probably worth more than she made in 2 years. Even broken, it was nicer than any piano she had touched since her conservatory days. The crowd was getting restless. Someone coughed loudly, and she heard a few whispered comments about how long she was taking. Mrs. Whitmore tapped her foot impatiently. "Any day now?" Mrs. Whitmore said loudly. "We don't have all night." Maria slowly sat down on the piano bench and adjusted her position. The bench was the perfect height, and for a moment she felt like she was 20 years old again, sitting in the practice rooms at the conservatory. Her teacher, Professor Williams, had always told her students to take a moment to connect with the instrument before playing. "A piano is not just wood and strings," he used to say. "It's a living thing that responds to your emotions." Treat it with respect, and it will sing for you. She placed her hands on the keys without pressing them down, feeling the familiar smoothness under her fingertips. Even though some keys were broken, she could sense the potential that still lived inside the instrument. It was like finding a wounded bird that could still fly. The ballroom had become completely silent now. Even the waiters had stopped moving to watch what would happen. Maria could feel hundreds of eyes on her, but somehow it didn't matter anymore. The only thing that mattered was the music waiting to be born. She closed her eyes and let her fingers explore the keyboard, gently testing each key to understand exactly what she had to work with. The broken keys made no sound at all, like missing teeth in a smile. The damaged keys produced weak, hollow tones that faded quickly. But the rest of the piano was still beautiful, still capable of magic. A plan began forming in her mind. She had played damaged instruments before during her student days when the conservatory couldn't afford to fix everything immediately. She remembered how Professor Williams had taught her to work around problems, to find creative solutions when the music demanded it. Every limitation is an opportunity to discover something new, he had said. The greatest musicians are not those who play perfect instruments perfectly. They are those who can make any instrument sing. Maria opened her eyes and looked out at the crowd. Their faces were a mix of curiosity, amusement, and in some cases genuine interest. She could see Tony and Patricia and the other catering staff standing near the kitchen door, looking worried for her. Janet was biting her lip nervously. Mrs. Whitmore was still smiling, but it was a different kind of smile now. She was probably expecting Maria to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star badly and give everyone a good laugh. But Maria wasn't the same person who had walked into this ballroom hours ago. That woman had been tired, defeated, invisible. This woman sitting at the piano bench was someone who had studied music for years, who had won competitions, who had once been told she had the talent to play with the world's greatest orchestras. She thought about Carlos and Isabella one more time. In a few hours, she would go home and tuck them into bed, and they would ask her about her day. What would she tell them? That she ran away when things got difficult? That she let people make her feel small and worthless? Or would she tell them that their mother had reminded a room full of important people that everyone deserves respect, regardless of what job they do or how much money they have? Maria straightened her shoulders and placed her hands in position over the keys. She knew exactly what she was going to play, and she knew it was going to work. The broken piano wasn't her enemy. It was her partner in creating something that had never existed before. She took one last deep breath, feeling 20. Years of hidden dreams rising up inside her chest like a wave. The room was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat, and then she began to play. The first notes that came from the piano were so soft that some people in the back of the room had to lean forward to hear them. Maria began with a gentle melody in the upper register, her fingers dancing across keys that still worked perfectly. The sound was clear and sweet, like drops of honey falling into silence, but something was different about this music. It wasn't following any pattern the guests recognized. Maria was playing around the broken keys so smoothly that at first, no one realized what she was doing. Where a normal piano piece would have used the dead middle C, she shifted the melody up an octave. Where the damaged E should have played, she substituted a harmony that made the music even more beautiful than the original. Mrs. Whitmore's smile began to fade as she realized this wasn't going to be the disaster she had expected. The woman at the piano wasn't fumbling around trying to play simple songs. She was doing something that required real skill and knowledge. Maria's confidence grew with each measure. Her hands remembered movements they hadn't made in years, and muscle memory took over where conscious thought left off. She started with a piece she had learned as a teenager, but she was changing it completely, redesigning it to work with the broken instrument. The melody flowed from the higher keys down to the lower register, carefully avoiding the dead zone in the middle. But instead of sounding incomplete, it sounded intentional, like the music had been written specifically for this damaged piano. Maria was creating bridges of sound that jumped over the broken keys, landing perfectly on notes that could sing. People in the crowd started to look at each other with confused expressions. This wasn't what they had expected at all. The server who was supposed to embarrass herself was actually playing real music, and it was beautiful. Young Patricia, watching from near the kitchen, felt tears starting in her eyes. She had never heard anything so lovely in her life. Old Tony stopped pretending to clean glasses and just stood there listening, his mouth slightly open in amazement. As Maria played, she began to experiment more boldly. She discovered that some of the damaged keys, while too weak to carry a melody, could still produce gentle percussive sounds. She started incorporating these soft taps into the music, using the piano's broken state as a feature rather than a flaw. The effect was magical. The weak keys created a subtle rhythm underneath the melody, like distant raindrops or gentle footsteps. It was a sound that no healthy piano could make. Something completely unique and unexpectedly beautiful. By now, every conversation in the ballroom had stopped. Servers had put down their trays, guests had forgotten their champagne, and even the kitchen staff had come out to listen. The only sound in the entire room was Maria's music flowing from the broken piano like water, finding its way around rocks in a stream. Maria closed her eyes and let the music take her back to the conservatory, to late nights practicing in small rooms with Professor Williams encouraging her to push boundaries. "Don't just play the notes," he used to say. "Make them tell a story." The story she was telling now was her own. The upper register spoke of dreams and hopes, bright and shining like stars. The lower keys rumbled with the weight of responsibility and hardship, and the broken keys, silent but present, represented all the things in life that don't work the way they should but somehow make the whole picture more meaningful. As she moved into the second part of her improvised piece, Maria began to play with more emotion. Her fingers pressed harder, and the working keys responded with richer, fuller tones. She was building to something, creating tension that everyone in the room could feel even if they didn't understand music. Mr. Thompson, who had been annoyed about the lack of entertainment, found himself leaning forward in his chair. He owned several businesses but had never heard anything that moved him the way this music did. The woman at the piano wasn't just playing notes. She was painting pictures with sound. Linda, the stressed event coordinator, had completely forgotten about her problems. The evening she thought was ruined was turning into something magical that people would talk about for years. She pulled out her phone, not to mock like some guests had planned earlier, but to record something extraordinary. Mrs. Whitmore was no longer smiling at all. She stood frozen, her champagne glass forgotten in her hand, watching a woman she had tried to humiliate create beauty that she couldn't begin to understand. For the first time in years, she felt small and foolish. Maria sensed the change in the room's energy. She could feel the attention of every person there, but it was different now. They weren't waiting for her to fail. They were hoping she would continue. The shift in their focus gave her even more courage to explore what the piano could do. She began incorporating techniques she had learned in advanced classes, using the full range of the keyboard to create the illusion of multiple instruments. Her left hand played a bass line that sounded almost like a cello, while her right hand danced through melodies that sparkled like violin solos. The broken keys became rest notes, spaces of silence that made the surrounding music more powerful. The piece she was creating had no name because it had never existed before this moment. It was born from the marriage of her memories, her pain, her love for her children, and this particular broken piano on this particular night. It couldn't be replayed exactly because it came from a place deeper than sheet music. As she played, Maria thought about Roberto and how he used to listen to her practice. She thought about Carlos and Isabella sleeping at home and how proud they would be if they could see their mother now. She thought about all the years she had hidden her talent, all the time she had felt invisible and worthless, but mostly she stopped thinking altogether and just let the music flow through her like a river that had been dammed up for too long. The climax of the piece came when Maria discovered she could make the broken keys work in a completely different way. By pressing them very gently and using the sustain pedal, she could create ghostly echoes that blended with the strong notes from the working keys. It was like having a conversation between the damaged and the whole, between what was lost and what remained. The effect was so beautiful that several people in the audience started crying without knowing why. The music spoke to something deep inside them, something about resilience and finding beauty in broken things. As Maria built toward the ending, she used every technique she knew. Her hands moved across the keyboard like she was conducting an orchestra, pulling sounds from the piano that no one had imagined it could make. The broken instrument was singing, truly singing, in ways that a perfect piano never could. The final notes were played so softly they seemed to float in the air, before fading into silence. Maria held her hands just above the keys for a moment, letting the last vibrations die away naturally. Then she opened her eyes and looked out at the ballroom. Every single person was staring at her in complete silence. Some had tears streaming down their faces. Others looked like they had just witnessed something impossible. The quiet stretched on, as if no one wanted to break the spell her music had created. Maria slowly stood up from the piano bench, her heart pounding. She had done it. She had taken their cruelty and transformed it into something beautiful. She had reminded herself and everyone else who she really was underneath the uniform and the exhaustion. She was a musician. She always had been, and she always would be. And then the applause began. The applause started slowly, with just one person clapping softly in the back of the room. Then another person joined in, and another, until the sound built like a wave rushing toward shore. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted into the loudest, most genuine applause Maria had ever heard in her life. People weren't just clapping politely, like they did for the usual entertainment at these events. They were standing up, some of them shouting, "Bravo!" and "Incredible!" Their faces showed real emotion, real amazement. Many guests were wiping tears from their eyes, and even the tough-looking security guards by the door were applauding enthusiastically. Maria stood beside the piano, overwhelmed by the response. Her legs felt weak, and she had to hold on to the piano bench to steady herself. After 3 years of being invisible, of having people look right through her, suddenly everyone in the room was looking directly at her with respect and admiration. Mrs. Whitmore was still standing in the same spot where she had started her cruel joke, but everything about her had changed. Her face was pale, and tears were streaming down her cheeks, ruining her expensive makeup. The diamond necklace around her neck caught the light as her shoulders shook with silent sobs. She walked slowly toward Maria, and the crowd grew quiet, waiting to see what would happen. When she reached the piano, Mrs. Whitmore looked directly into Maria's eyes for the first time all evening. "I am so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I had no idea. I was cruel and stupid, and I am deeply ashamed of myself." Maria could see that the apology was genuine. The proud, arrogant woman from earlier was gone, replaced by someone who had been deeply moved by the music and horrified by her own behavior. "We all make mistakes," Maria replied quietly. "Music has a way of showing us who we really are." Mrs. Whitmore nodded and stepped back, still crying. Other guests began gathering around the piano, all wanting to speak with Maria. They asked her where she had learned to play, how long she had been studying music, and why she was working as a server instead of performing professionally. Linda, the event coordinator, was practically glowing with excitement. The evening she thought was ruined had turned into the most memorable charity gala in the organization's history. People were already saying it was the most beautiful performance they had ever witnessed, but the most important moment came when a tall, elderly man with gray hair and kind eyes made his way through the crowd. He had been sitting at a table near the back, quietly observing everything. Now he approached Maria with tears in his eyes and a look of wonder on his face. "Excuse me," he said gently. "My name is Dr. Harrison, and I'm the artistic director of the City Symphony Orchestra, what you just did. I've been in the music world for 40 years, and I have never seen anything like it." Maria's heart stopped. The City Symphony Orchestra was one of the most respected musical organizations in the country. She had dreamed of playing with them when she was a student, but that seemed like a lifetime ago. I don't understand, Dr. Harrison continued, how someone with your extraordinary talent is working as a server. Would you mind telling me about your musical background? So Maria told him. She told him about the conservatory, about Professor Williams, about the competitions she had won and the dreams she had set aside. She told him about Roberto's death, about raising 2 children alone, about the 3 jobs that kept food on the table but left no time for music. Dr. Harrison listened to every word, nodding occasionally and asking thoughtful questions. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking deeply about something. Maria, he said finally, I have a proposition for you. We've been searching for a pianist for a new contemporary classical project. It's not traditional orchestra work. We need someone who can think creatively, who can work with unusual instruments and challenging pieces. Someone who can find beauty in imperfection. He gestured toward the broken piano. What you did tonight proves you're exactly the musician we've been looking for. The position would pay enough for you to quit your other jobs and focus on music. Again, it would also include health insurance for you and your children. Maria felt dizzy. She gripped the piano bench tighter, wondering if she was dreaming. Are you serious? She whispered. Completely serious, Dr. Harrison replied. We rehearse 3 days a week, perform twice a month, and the salary is $60,000 a year to start. You'd also have access to practice studios whenever you need them. $60,000. That was more than she made working 3 jobs combined. It would mean coming home to Carlos and Isabella every evening. It would mean being able to help them with homework, attend their school events, be the mother she wanted to be instead of just a tired woman who worked all the time. But the most amazing moment was still to come. As Maria and Dr. Harrison were talking, Linda approached them with a confused expression on her face. I'm sorry to interrupt, Linda sighed, but something very unusual has happened. Someone wants to buy the piano. The broken piano? Dr. Harrison asked. Yes, and they're offering $50,000 for it. The crowd around them gasped. The piano had been donated for the charity auction with an estimated value of $500, considering its damage. $50,000 was an incredible amount. There's one condition, Linda continued. The buyer wants Maria to be the piano's permanent guardian. They want her to have access to it whenever she wants to play, and they're requesting that she perform on it at future charity events. Maria couldn't speak. Someone had been so moved by her performance that they were willing to pay a fortune, just to ensure she could continue playing this specific instrument. It was the most generous gesture anyone had ever made toward her. Who is the buyer? Dr. Harrison asked. Linda looked around the room and shrugged. They want to remain anonymous. The only message they gave me was, some things are worth more than money. Later, Maria would discover that the anonymous buyer was Mr. Chun, her boss from the diner. He had heard about the performance from his daughter who worked at the hotel, and he had used his life savings to make the purchase. You always hummed such beautiful songs in my kitchen, he would tell her weeks later. I knew you had magic inside you. As the evening wound down, Maria found herself surrounded by business cards from people wanting to hire her for private parties, weddings, and other events. The woman who had arrived that evening as an invisible server was leaving as one of the most talked about musicians in the city. The other catering staff gathered around her before she left, all of them beaming with pride. Patricia hugged her tightly and said, You showed them that we're not just workers. We're people with dreams and talents and stories. Old Tony wiped his eyes and shook her hand. In 50 years of working these fancy parties, I never saw anything like what you did tonight. You made all of us proud. When Maria finally got home at 2 a.m, Carlos and Isabella were fast asleep. She sat on their bed and watched them breathe peacefully, their faces innocent and beautiful in the dim light from the hallway. Tomorrow, she would tell them that their lives were about to change. They would never again worry about having enough money for food or clothes or school supplies. Their mother would be home every evening to help with homework and read bedtime stories. And most importantly, their house would be filled with music again, but tonight she simply kissed their foreheads and hummed the same lullaby she had sung to them every night for years. Only now it sounded different. It sounded like hope. 3 months later, Maria gave her first official performance with the City Symphony Orchestra. Carlos and Isabella sat in the front row, wearing new clothes and beaming with pride as their mother played a specially composed piece on her broken piano, which had been moved to the concert hall for the occasion. The piece was called Finding Beauty in Broken Things, and when the final notes faded into silence, the audience gave her a standing ovation that lasted 10 minutes. But the best part was seeing her children's faces glowing with the knowledge that their mother wasn't just a survivor, but an artist who could create magic from the most unexpected places. Maria had learned that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from broken instruments, and sometimes the most extraordinary moments come from the most ordinary days. All it takes is the courage to play your song, even when the world expects you to stay silent.